Okay, so welcome to the last session for the conference, and well, not the last session actually, the last session in which we're formally standing here making some discussions and presentations, and then you have the opportunity afterwards to do some more discussing and talk again about the project or about other things that you want to talk about. There must be other things by now that you want to talk about, but anyway, you can think about that afterwards. Okay, we had the parallel sessions today, so we decided just to start off with a very brief intervention from each of the moderators who was involved in the parallel sessions. So I'm just going to ask them to come up and make a few of the comments, like just really to capture in a few words what they thought were some of the outcomes of that. So we'll take it in the order that the sessions were. So we're going to go with Hans Quack first, and then we'll go to Michael Boulakis, and then I'll ask Georgia to come and summarize. Georgia, you'll summarize, and then last will be Cindy, and you'll summarize it. Okay, Cindy? Okay. So, over to you.
I had the honor to moderate a session on stakeholder collaboration. We had a really nice session with 4 different presentations on stakeholder collaboration, varying from private parties cooperating in construction, horizontal, vertical collaboration in supply chains, but also public-private and even public-private research collaboration in city logistics. The main lesson was that these projects and pilots do not only result in the direct measurable results that we present out of the pilot, but also have an added value as they allow for building relationships with, between different partners, so that's the collaboration. And that it's good to engage these partners in projects and to build these relations in order to do more. But to do more, we need some things to be in place, and that's on the one hand, the project or the pilot that we discussed should be part of a bigger strategy or should fit into a bigger objective, and there is leadership required for the collaboration. And that's both for the public and the private parts, that's the case. So if that's in place, actually we concluded that the actual results we present of pilots and demonstration or even of projects are probably the actual results are bigger than the ones that we only results in CO2 reduction or fewer kilometers, because based on these relationships, new and other things and projects will be started, which will in the end also have results. So that's basically the good thing of the stakeholder collaboration. It leads to more than just project results. Thank you.
Good afternoon to everybody. I was moderator for the session around improved knowledge of urban logistics, and very fascinating session, for very, very strong presentations for the 4 projects, and very, very different in a way, but some key issues emerged following this session, which I would like to suggest a few of those, which can pave the way and open and unravel some ideas for us to consider for the future. One key lesson to be learned, let's say, definitely for me, is the issue of engagement with stakeholders. All these projects involve stakeholders, whether that's industry, councils, NGOs, and so on. It's very clear, based on what people present, that these successful projects have worked closely with stakeholders, have co-created the project, and have delivered value working closely with them. So, in some occasions, these stakeholders validate or even refine in the process all these ideas we're presenting in this session. So that's important. This engagement is becoming more and more and more important to improve knowledge. Another issue that came out during presentation, and I think personally as an academic and as a researcher, that presents a huge opportunity, is around thinking for the future, thinking about the long term, and of course thinking about creation of bigger data sets, more longitudinal, thinking about the long-term, let's say, issues, and primarily by having these longitudinal data sets, we can do analysis and be able to identify projections, trends, and future opportunities to make a difference, to create an impact, whether that's around sustainability or whether that'll be urban logistics and urban policy. I think that's very important because this can make a big difference, and it was very clear through the first presentation, my session, that this is becoming a big issue. And of course, because all these 4 projects are data-driven, and many people in the session, other sessions I participated, said about challenges, about getting data, the benefits to provide to stakeholders. I think it's very important to engage with stakeholders from the very, very beginning, proposal stage, to be part of that, to refine, to shape it, to provide ideas, and get them, let's say, to participate from the very, very beginning. At the end of the day, we need to think from their perspective, what's for them, what's for stakeholders, what is for us. And I think that's another key issue which we have to bear in mind. And last but not least, I think there is an opportunity, and came up during the session, about cooperative analysis, multi-user analysis, think, let's say, outside the box. In a way, most of the analysis sometimes can be around one pilot, one case, one city, and came up very strongly the session that this kind of cooperative, multi-user, between different industries, between different sectors, or even different cities, joined up thinking, may be an opportunity, because urban logistics is not a challenge for one city or one region or one country. It's becoming a pan-European, it's becoming a global challenge. So I think that's another one which may want to consider as improved knowledge for a future, let's say, thinking from now on, and not only. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon again. I was very honored to moderate the session on policy and regulation planning for sustainable urban freight. We said that we would like to give, after the session, answers to questions like what policy I need, what planning I should follow, and what regulation we need in order to make sustainable urban logistics a reality to cities. We had very good presentations from 2 municipal representatives, 1 representative from region and 2 academia. There was very good results regarding tools, regarding planning process that has been reported to us. And then there was a very good, very nice discussion, started with the main issue, 1, data. Okay, so there was a very nice discussion, debate. We don't need data at all until the moment we need a lot of data. So at the end, we came to the conclusion that finally we need 3 different sets of data. Data for arguments, creation and strategy justification. Data for justifying investments like UCCs, which is a more detailed set of data. And then data for impact analysis. So that means that if we want to create arguments, then probably we look for a minimum set of data that can be defined after all this work that has been done in these projects. And then we try to make it regularly be collected. And then how we can do that? There was a lot of ideas given. There was ideas coming from saying enforcement. Okay, let's put enforcement and let's add technology and let's collect this data. Then let's put regulation like if you are using this urban environment and you are established there, so you have to share some data with me and we neutralize, so create incentives or impose to the industrial actors to give the data. And there was from industrial actors also an issue regarding the data related to their cost structure, that there is a law, so we need some changes in the legislative framework for antitrusting legislative framework, so that some of the data can be identified in order to be shared, because currently the industrial stakeholders, they cannot share the data. So that closed the chapter data. Then regarding planning, we concluded that we need SALP, Sustainable Urban Logistics Plans, to be a separate plan for the cities and to be through policy considered like the SAMP, so we can have a common strategy for the city, but then we need to have something separate, so we need to adapt this LTIS methodology and everything, and we had a very good industrial argument there. They said, look, we are industrial actors, we don't have so much time to spend in discussing and in making all these processes of a SAMP, so we need something more straightforward. Then we said that tools, especially models, are very important in order to couple the issue of the data, but also for reasoning. Then we identified at the level of planning, we need also to go at the level of regional planning, because some of the problems can be found there, and also infrastructure development can be found there. Before last, competence center and capacity building in the cities needs to continue and needs to strengthen, and probably we need to get funds in order these competence centers to be created for sustainable urban logistics, in order to substantiate the cooperation with the stakeholder and use the knowledge that is created. And finally, what was the final one? Well, I think it was a final one, but I don't remember it. Sorry. I will, if I get it, I will tell you. Thank you. Sorry for this. Yes, about the role of the research projects, because we have faced a lot of presentation about research projects, and we asked the municipal authorities how they can use these research projects, because there was a question, should we continue over here or we should stop? And so from their presentation, it has been made apparent that their involvement in this type of projects is very important, not only for materializing the cooperation with the stakeholders, but also for getting funds, and also for creating part of the planning or implementing their planning. So it's very important to continue. Thank you.
Yes, so I moderate with the session Innovative Approaches to Urban Logistics and Their Business Cases. So we went in depth in the 4 projects to better understand a specific case study or concept. We had 2 presentations related to consolidation centers. In CityLab, a company is delivering goods using electric vehicles and a centrally located consolidation center. In Success, we had a feedback on the potential of consolidation centers for the construction sector. For this promising solution in terms of environmental benefits, the business model for this kind of initiative still remains fragile, and the business case to exist or to grow is not obvious. We need to understand better what condition they might be financially sustainable beyond the duration of the project itself and after the end of the EU fundings, because one size fits all approach is difficult when it comes to identify solutions in urban logistics. It's important to carefully analyze the situation and not just do a copy-paste from one case to another one. The 2 other presentations have highlighted the potential of the digitalization to transform the current transport system toward a more sustainable one. So to refer to the transport research arena hosted last week in Vienna, we are in a digital era for transport, and we need solutions for society, economy, and environment. So we need to continue to take this wave to use in a good way technologies. In that perspective, U-Turn has presented a collaborative platform enabling sharing capacities between 3PLs that would have not been possible without an IT system. And in Novelog, the authorization to use bus lanes and the management of loading and loading bays in the limited traffic zone in Turin for specific logistics operator would have not been possible without the possibility to monitor operations with the appropriate ITS.
Okay, so we're going to have some questions. I will ask some questions to the panel. And I think if I work it out roughly correctly, there's just over 40 minutes. There's 8 people on the panel. That's 5 minutes each, okay, if you all spoke. So let's see if we can, how many questions we can actually get into that time, all right? Because I think it would be great to hear from everybody and to have some good points. But we're also going to take some questions from the floor as well, all right? And if it works, I'll be the most surprised person in the room. But anyway, okay. No, but first of all, I need to introduce you, because I think you know the 4 coordinators by now. Georgia, Jardar, Eleni, and Cindy you don't know because Cindy is standing in for your colleague who had Francesco, who has left. And Cindy, you've been working in the Research Institute in Luxembourg Institute of Science and Technology on quite a number of projects to do with city logistics. And before that, you worked in engineering and software selection. So you're very welcome to the panel. Thank you for standing in for your colleague. Thanks. Okay, I'm just going to briefly introduce the other members of the panel. First of all, Simon Osolowski. Simon's from the European Commission, where he's responsible for work concerned a lot with the maritime transport, as well as parts of the management of the Marco Polo program. And so your interest in this is sort of in that more the overview and the overall side of it. So we're very glad to have you take part this afternoon in that way. As I said, we're going down the list. We have Eleni Zampou, who I think by now you know, and Jardar Andersen, who you also know. And then we have Fernando Liesa, do you say? Liesa? Okay. Secretary General of ALICE, which is a European technology platform, really very important in helping to shape strategy and the direction for research. And again, we're very happy that you would take part in the panel. So thanks a lot, Fernando, for that. Georgia, you know by now, and was a leader of the coordinator for novelog-project. And Cindy, I just introduced in terms of success. Karen Vancluysen. Karen, you're the Secretary General of Polis. And obviously that gives you lots of connections with many of the other networks and other bodies that influence the strategy and also use the information that comes out of the projects to support other networks and to support other people. So thank you very much for joining in the panel this afternoon. And Alison Conway, who's from Associate Professor of Civil Engineering at the City College of New York, and also a member of the Volvo Research and Education Foundation Metro Freight Center. So Alison has a lot of connections with other people in the room, including Laetitia Deblanc, who spoke this morning, and other people in these networks. So Alison, you're very welcome, and it's nice to see you in person. We did a webinar together a couple of days, it feels like a couple of days ago, but anyway, at the end of last week, and so it was a bit strange to talking on the Skype, so now it's nice to have you here in the conference. So you're very welcome as well. They're very varied backgrounds, and they can really contribute a lot, but to do that, I think we need to give them some questions, okay? So I'll do my best to come up with some questions. We'll open it up for a discussion. If you want to butt in, you have to kind of wave at me, otherwise it won't work at all in my experience, all right? So, and if you go on too long, I'll stop you because it's more interesting like that. To have more things are better in this situation, all right? But I'm going to ask actually Karen to just say a little bit about the sort of general theme that we've been looking at here today, which is really, okay, great, we've done the projects and sad that they're ending and so on, but what do we think, sort of from a panel point of view, what do we think are some of the really big challenges that we're going to face? And you don't have to sort of list all of them, but if you had to highlight a couple of them, which sort of challenges would you pick out from your perspective about urban freight and going into the next few years?
Yeah. So speaking from the city's perspective and our members, there's not just the urban freight challenge, there is the overarching urban transport challenge, let's say, that we have in our cities, and that pretty much steer the way urban mobility policies are being framed and developed. And those major challenges are congestion, pollution, noise, and safety, basically. And urban freight plays a considerable role, let's say, in those overarching challenges as well. When we move down to the specific urban freight related challenges, there's the issue of the growing population and the resulting economic growth, but also economic challenges that are linked to that. There are a number of new patterns that we have seen emerging and that surely have been discussed. New buying patterns such as e-commerce, which pose their own specific challenges and result in different patterns and fragmentation of deliveries that cities need to get their head around. There's the construction works and logistics, which are very apparent and predominant in cities and will continue to be there in the coming years, and we have to see how we deal with that in the most efficient way. And then there's the overarching European target of the CO2-free city logistics by 2030 that we all need to contribute to.
It's got a lot closer, 2030.
Yeah. So,
it used to seem far enough away you could sort of, 2030.
Yeah, no, it's not that far away.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's the big picture really that we are looking at. And, there's
That's-
enough work to be done.
Yeah. No, that's great. That's a good way to start. And what I'd like to do is perhaps just because, Alison, I know it's interesting to have you here because we're part of this whole EU and US idea of twinning things together. But maybe you could just comment on a couple of things that you feel as a challenge and just say maybe something about whether you think what's the value in sharing this information from your perspective? Because, you know, from our perspective, it's nice to have your views here, for different take on things. But from the US perspective, things are a bit different. You don't have all these projects in quite the same way, for instance. So what's there really to learn from it?
Yeah, so first is, you just named 4 challenges, and they're exactly the same challenges we're dealing with from the US side. Now, there absolutely are key differences. We have different governmental structure. We have very different spatial organization of our cities, although I would argue that our cities are starting to look more like your cities rather than less because of urbanization and installation of multimodal networks that were before it was mostly for cars. Absolutely, we are jealous of your research structure where you have projects like the ones that have been presented at this event, where you're working together across multiple cities on sort of different pieces, but of a unified whole, which is something we have not had the opportunity because of the way our funding is structured through states. We're not necessarily able to do that. I think the biggest benefit is that as I look at the projects here, I can see that there might be differences in the big picture things like the government and the spatial organization, but when you get down into the details of the projects, those are the things that you have to have experimentation to learn. Just some examples. When we're talking about the cargo cycle projects, I saw on one of the posters it mentioned labor issues, and as we've started to investigate cargo cycles in New York, they maybe aren't exactly the same labor issues, but we didn't go into the project thinking that was a key constraint, and now we're starting to realize that it is. So having those experimentations from many places, we get to those pieces.
Yeah, and I think it would be interesting what happens next in the cargo cycle thing, because isn't the law just changed, or the regulation on the cycles is possibly changing, is it, in New York?
Yeah, so in New York, we had a gray area of regulations that basically any electrically assisted bicycle was considered illegal on the streets of New York. But just about 2 weeks ago, the mayor announced that we were going to clarify the regulations and allow pedal assist bikes.
Yeah.
So that's going to completely open up the market for cargo cycles.
Yeah, so all of these other things could be valuable in that. I want to give the word, first of all, to the people who haven't been part of panels before. So I'm going to ask the 4 people who joined, and then I'll ask a slightly different question to start back with the 4 project coordinators. Okay, so I'm going to ask Fernando, perhaps, to sort of slightly go on from that. I mean, when you see a lot of these kind of meetings, and in a sense, we could say, okay, here are 4 big challenges, and to what extent, how does ALICE play a role in those challenges? And do you think, do you feel sort of optimistic about the challenges, or when you hear Karen talk about them like that, do you feel like this is a little bit overwhelming in some cases, perhaps?
Yeah. What we think is that first of all, in ALICE we tend to be optimistic because indeed the challenges are there, but if we manage the challenges, this will become very easily opportunities. For example, I think Karen already mentioned on e-commerce, and this is exploring, is getting a lot of new transport. But at the end of the day, this is how we face the e-commerce thing. For example, I think it was a research of Professor Macaris was saying that 52 of the shopping lifts, trips were on purpose. So this meaning going with my car to the shopping center and buying the goods. And there is a collateral study of Procter & Gamble saying that 25% of the CO2 and emissions is coming from the shopping trips, sorry. Yeah. So then their e-commerce could bring us a lot of efficiency if it's done properly, and get us not only benefits as consumers, but also in societal. But of course, this needs to be managed in a different way as it is managed today. But for that, we need the leadership and collaboration with the cities. in order to face these challenges and convert them into opportunities.
Yeah, so sort of good to see the connection to the other areas and to work with that. But as you say, it's sort of a little bit unpredictable how some of those things will go, and it's sometimes important then to look ahead and see what's happening with it. Okay, I think we'll come back to a couple of those things actually in a minute. But Simon, I know you're not directly connected to this particular issue of e-commerce and so on and so forth, but from your point of view, sort of stepping back one from this, how do you see transport being able to react to these challenges, particularly the kind of intermodal, multimodal role of different sort of transport systems here?
Well, I think, first of all, the issue is that the transport and logistics in particular is the task for the industry itself. For the regulators, including the European Commission, I think what is the most important is to provide the right framework condition for the businesses to operate. And there will be challenges, of course, and looking from the general perspective of the supply chain, I mean, some of the challenges are obvious, like environmental sustainability. This is one of the most important issues. All the emission, pollution, congestion, accidents, and so on and so on. Secondly, I would like to point out the interoperability, which is really of great importance for us. And this interoperability issue can be understood differently from different points of view, from different angles. So, for example, we can speak about the technical interoperability in terms of the physical infrastructure, in terms of equipment, but also interoperability in terms of information exchange along the supply chain, which is, I think, of growing importance for the businesses. And this interoperability issue is, I think, becoming really essential to interconnect the stakeholders, the players along the supply chain, and to create a level playing field, actually, in the logistics chains. We can speak also about the legal interoperability, which is also important for the stakeholders. We speak about 28 member states. Of course, there are different legal systems sometimes in the countries. So the stakeholders, the players, have to face different regulations, different administrative requirements, and this is also a challenge for us. Yeah. So I think those two elements are very important, and perhaps I will have to mention one more thing, which is also of, I think, big importance here. It's the technology development, new technologies, disruptive technologies like, for example, 3D printing, like automation, like digitalization, Internet of Things. And this technological development, of course, will imply additional challenges, for example, for the social aspects, for example, for labor force. And I think those elements should definitely be addressed.
Yes. No, I think that's that's a good discussion, and I think the question of who's responsible for some of those changes is also interesting. And a second thing which I'm going to ask you to comment on as a panel in a moment a little bit is, isn't some of this rather different if you're a very big organization from if you're a very small one? You know, how do we deal with the small ones and engage with them? So perhaps you can think a little bit about that while we're sort of going through a couple of questions. But I want to ask something to the project coordinators, because, you know, your role's been very important, and Eleni, we can start with you, it's fine, because I'm going to ask you a little bit to reflect on a quite open question, and just to take your perspective as someone who's seen the project develop and seen what happens with them. I know not just this project, but other ones as well. And I think, you know, that's really about how to keep the momentum going in this field. You know, how do we keep it going in the next parts of this? You know, how do we make sure that what's learnt in the projects continues? And who should sort of lead in that? Who, from your perspective, should take a lead in doing that? You know, is it the city? Is it industry? Is it associations? I mean, I know that we have a tendency to say it's all of those people, but they can't all be in the lead, all right? So perhaps you could say a little bit how we're going to keep the momentum going of the findings we have here.
Oh, okay. Actually, this is a difficult question because it's one of the questions that we have in all of the sessions that we have participated, the continuity of the work that we are doing. And we usually answer all of these stakeholders, but actually there should be one stakeholder that is the leader in each one of the activities. For the cases that focus on the cities, probably cities should be the leader in specific areas that they are of their interest. In our case, that mainly focus on private sector partnerships, it should be at least one of the companies that are involved in the collaborative schemes. What I have seen from my experience in the project up to now is there is a need of one person that believes...
So people are important.
Yeah.
Okay.
One people that represent one organization, in our case, a person in a company.
I think that's a very important point, actually. I mean, I think we talk a lot about structures and processes, and of course the programs that fund the research are they're really clearly very important. But often when you look at what changes something, it's an individual has a surprising effect, particularly in a field which is perhaps developing quite quickly or changing, and where there's opportunities to do that.
Or if I could ask also something, because you have mentioned previously how we could engage large companies, small companies. I think that what differentiates sometimes small with big companies are the people that are working in the small companies. If we ensure that people that are in small companies are more well educated, have a broader perspective of the things that could be achieved towards these efforts that we have done, then we could at least increase the possibility of continuity of the actions that we are taking during these research projects and activities.
Yeah. Maybe I could ask Jardar to go next, and we can come back to Georgia and Cindy after that. You don't have to answer exactly the same question, but maybe what you saw change during the project, which type of organizations were surprised you in how active they were, perhaps, without,
But starting from the initial question, which I started preparing when you asked, I think that for the sort of overall city logistics issues in the cities and urban areas, the local authorities or regional, depending on the structure, has a crucial role in ensuring continuity in these topics. And I think we've seen also during the parallel sessions today that there are in this audience good examples of cities that have been able to, through European projects and other research projects as well, use those within a sort of more long-term strategy and building piece by piece from one project to the next, which I think is very good. And also on the dependence on individuals, that has been experienced in CITYLAB as well as in many other projects, that you are very often dependent on the particular interests of individual persons, and that applies to cities, also companies. But I think in the case of the cities, that's really another reason for having a well-anchored strategy on city level so that you don't depend that much on the individual persons.
Yeah. Yes, and that's a tricky area, I think, because one of the problems that I see with it is that it's there are many good practices which are captured in projects, and that's very good, and they're written down, and that's nice. But in day-to-day experience, there's also many good things that you come across. But in many cases, city authorities or the people working in the different roles, they're not very well documented. And then when the person changes, it's even more difficult to find out what's happening. So I think capturing things is surprisingly difficult. And we have a huge potential knowledge base, but the reality is that it's much, much smaller than the potential. And I think it's a good point to make about how we can address that to go in the next thing. We can keep going this way, Georgia, and you can perhaps say a little bit about your perception of who would you like to see show more engagement, perhaps, without... I know it sounds like you're criticising a setup, but I guess we can say it's not about criticising, it's just that when they engage, the effects are quite profound. So you can maybe extend it a little bit. Or you can answer the question I said in the first place.
Okay. Well, I don't think that one organization or one person can save this. This is a very complex thing. So if we look in this room, we are a community already. And if some of you that you have participated in other meetings, you will recognize the half of the people being the same. So in fact, there's already a community for city logistics and stand-up city logistics, and this project has created this community. And this project was based on the work that has been done in different countries and in different cities and elsewhere. So in fact, first of all, we need to keep this community. And we need to keep this community, so this type of events, they need to continue, where we can exchange our experience and our best practice, as you said, Mike, and properly being supported by capacities that can make all the best practices accessible to everybody. This is one thing. The second thing is that I think we need the multipliers. And the multipliers are the associations, are technology platforms, that they have a structure and they have the capacity to some selected results of this project to keep them maintained, of course, with the cooperation of the actors in the projects, and make them aware. And finally, I think we need the regulators. So for me, regulators, sorry for this, is two things. Of course, is EU that is major funder and supporter, but also is the cities.
Okay.
And the cities need to continue working on that.
Right. Good. Good. Cindy, do you want to add something or add your perspective from in construction?
Yeah.
Who could take the lead, for instance? Who is keen to be involved, and who seems surprisingly shy and retiring and doesn't want to? Oh no, not me. No, you know.
Yeah. So just a little bit of context.
Yeah.
So cities become larger and larger, and so it means that we need more building materials to bring in, to build and to innovate. We saw that for the construction sector, they have not reinvented themselves, have the manufacturing or the retailing did. So I think that as researchers, we are there to observe, to analyze, to develop tools. I think that the actor who should really take the lead for this should be from the industry, from the construction sector. They need to wake up, let's say. I think that cities usually are more passive than proactive. The cities which are there today are proactive because they feel interest in they feel concerned by the issue, but they don't represent the majority of the cities. So I think that the leadership should come from the construction industry for this topic.
Yeah. And Karen, you wanted to add something, so kind of short point, yeah.
Cities have been mentioned several times, as well as multipliers, so I felt I could maybe say something about that as well. I know you mentioned that we shouldn't say we all need to play our role, but still, when we're talking about urban freight, city logistics, we are dealing with very complex stakeholder configurations. So in the end, you do end up with that phrase of saying that we all need to play our part. What we also see when we're talking about urban freight, and we saw that as well in the way we wanted to structure our activities within policies, that it links into many different issues. Sometimes you're talking about it from an economic point of view. In other cases, we're looking at clean vehicles for urban freight. In other cases, it very much links into challenges related to safety, vulnerable road users, and how we can protect them. And then we also touch upon the data sharing element, for example, public-private cooperation. So there's a whole arena of things that we need to take into account when we talk about urban freight. And coming back to the role of cities, we need to set the regulations, the regulatory framework, the context. And indeed, sustainable urban logistics plans are probably a key tool that we need to build on. When it comes to the role of multipliers, I think the importance is in creating a legacy, making sure that what you've been doing in your projects doesn't get lost. Invest also in transferability approaches. How can we take a success in one city and transfer it to another city, taking into account the local context conditions? And we're very willing to contribute to that.
Good.
I see you're getting nervous, so I'll stop talking.
That's okay. No, I want to give the floor to Fernando. I'm determined to get two answers out of all of you and some comments from the floor. So, yeah. Fernando, yeah.
Yeah. I think urban logistics is complex and is getting even more complex. And I think one of the good things that we have done in the last 3-4 years is that we are trying to address this in a very consistent way together with Polis and ERTRAC. We deliver in 2013 a roadmap on research and innovation. Out of this roadmap, and some of the priorities were put in the call, and then the 4 projects that have been presented came out of that. I think the projects have delivered pretty well against what it was expecting from them. And then now it's also our duty to get the momentum and to get the community working into the new challenges, and make it for sure that in a couple of years are not appearing same kind of projects of this we had, because we need to learn from what we have done and address the new things. And then on the implementation part, I think one of the good things is that in the last 2-3 years, I have also seen a lot of more commitment and interest on a few number of cities in Europe that are trying to address the urban logistics and freight in a different way.
Yeah.
And I think that getting urban logistics addressed in a consistent way by the cities will also make sure that the good learnings out of the projects will be kept and will be implemented, and not only as reports of projects.
Okay, good. I want to sort of slightly change it and ask Alison to comment on this first, and that is because I was in a session with you in TRB in Washington, where there was a long discussion about whether we could learn from things that didn't work out as we expected. And when we hear about projects, often we report the project, and it's, you know, there was this plan, and then we got to there, and then this milestone, and the deliverable, and so on and so on and so on. But, I mean, what's your view on the learning from things that don't work? Did it strike a chord with you when you discussed it in TRB, and do you think it's something we can develop further?
Yeah, so I think there's huge value in learning from the things that didn't work, and I think that, and I know I'm on video, I'm not sure I should say this, probably no one in New York's watching, but I'm not sure that we've learned all the lessons that we can. For example, my city right now, I would say that some of the policies that are being implemented are based on the idea that we're going to price and enforce trucks off the road, and I feel like your projects here that have tried that and it didn't work, and now have sort of moved on to the next stage. So I think there's huge value in that, just to not repeat the same mistakes. And I hope we learn that lesson quickly.
Yeah, and get used to sharing some of those things rather than always just presenting the nice, neat stories. Yeah, Giorgio.
Yeah, I will not mention the cities of Novelog to which I refer, but indeed some of the very good results came from failures. And it's good that we have these research projects, because the research dimension is to test and to see. I remember Verlet, the mayor, says that from Messens, he said, I can give you only one advice: test, test, test. But in a context of a planning, I would say, of a plan. So, yeah, there are results. I mean, we have problems with cargo bikes and having them as a second mode. And all this, I think it will be nice if we, as we try to create compendiums of results that they have to be taken up or whatever, we should create common compendium of things that they cannot go further. The same is for the consolidation center. We discuss about consolidation center, and the viability of the consolidation does not go very well. So we need at the moment to say that, okay, 1-2 things cannot go, because then the stakeholders, the cities, they will believe us.
Yeah, I think there's a danger in both directions. I think there's a danger in saying that the answer is X, and another danger in saying that this doesn't work. And I think that we need to guard against that, both those tendencies, because the search for simple solutions to complicated problems, and we hear about the complexity, is usually a rather unsuccessful search. And yeah, Jardar, yeah.
I just wanted to say that I think we are mature enough with all the experience we got, not for this project but for previous, for some interventions to say that there are some roofs. So if you have the critical mass at that level, and if you have this and this, then you can go. And if you have the legislative framework that way, then it can go. If not, don't try it.
No, but when you talk to some people who sometimes have to formulate policy and you explain it's very complicated, I'm very rarely thanked for that piece of information. Okay, Jardar.
Just want to add that I think it's also important to sort of explore. I think we can do more to be better at sort of evaluating failures, because there may be different reasons for failure. I tried to Google learning from failure.
Yeah.
There's about 62 million hits.
Yes.
I didn't go through all of them, but still, it's a lot to
No,
learn.
and some are very good. Some of the things that have been done about it are very good, yeah. Okay, I think we had a good introduction from everybody, and some of you have spoken quite a bit. So I'm going to open it up because we have sort of, by my estimate, we have about 15 minutes to go. But I'm going to give the opportunity to just make a very short comment or question to Pia Karjalainen from ERTRAC. You're working with Mobility as a Service, or MaaS, and I guess it's interesting in city logistics just to reflect on that in a topic. So please, you can make a short comment or a question.
Yes, thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Pia Karjalainen. I'm coming from ERTRAC-ITS Europe, and they're coordinating the work of Mobility as a Service MaaS Alliance. MaaS Alliance is a network of soon 50 organizations coming from public and private sector in Europe, which are or want to be front runners in terms of developing new mobility services, especially mobility as a service. And as an association or network, we are building preconditions for the ecosystem. I was really interested to hear this discussion and also summaries from the different breakout sessions. Maybe my comment here or remark here is that, for example, this year when the Commission has said that this is year of multimodality, I was thinking that maybe we should actually a new definition for the multimodality, because as I see it, it's first of all, it's integration of different transport modes, road transport, aviation, maritime, and trains. It's basically an integration of different resources in transport system, whether they are public or private, and today more and more also shared economy resources, shared resources. But would the time be ready also maybe to expand the definition of the multimodality in a way that we combine a bit more the planning and flows of like mobility of the people and mobility of the goods more and more. So my question for the panelists is that what do you think, would time be ready already to maybe bring the flows and ecosystem of the mobility of person and mobility of goods a bit more closer to each other, and if so, who could actually take lead here? Because, for example, in this room we have representatives of different platforms and European Commission and cities and so on. So who could be the one who should push all us to work a bit more together?
Yeah, very good comment, and a very good point, I think, Pierre. I mean, we've actually touched on that slightly in the discussion, because the point was raised by Karen about e-commerce and the importance, by Fernando actually, but the point about e-commerce and the question of the trade-off between one system and another system, the personal trip or the other trip. And in one of the presentations, I think Ian Wainwright mentioned this question of, aren't we all part of the logistics chain when we go shopping in that sense? But for sure, yeah, why do you always see the same people when you go to conferences? Well, it's because they study freight or they study passenger transport or whatever it is, yeah. And okay, we can go down the room. Okay, we have two. We take Fernando and Georgia, and then we come here and then we go there. So this time you have to speed up a little bit, otherwise we don't get to 5:45 with 2 points from each of you.
For me, you are absolutely right. And mobility as a service is empowering the people, so it's user-centric. And for the goods, it's happening the same. And for me, I think it's going, for some comments, it's going to be a very hard time for the public transport authorities when they see their public transport for people is not anymore providing the value that is expected for the city as a whole. So then, who is going to take that part? It depends on how fast the public transport authorities react. Because if not, somebody else is going to take that from a business perspective, and then it could be a different end up.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting in the context of cities where, you know, the public space. Georgia's. No, I was going to say Georgia, but I just think it's interesting because from a perspective of who does what, a lot of that who does what takes place in a publicly regulated space, and that's a big question, I think, around what are you allowed to do in that space, in a sense, whether it's about freight or people or the loading and unloading activities of all these.
Okay, sometimes we're using the terms with open, let's say, identification. So bring together, in the context of mass mobility as a service, passengers and freight ecosystem yeah, the ecosystem is there. Of course, it's the city ecosystem at the end. So of course we can, then saying that, as I said before, that for planning we need different ways, different approaches, and equivalent, it's a different thing. Then speaking about who can take the leadership on that, and if it's going to be just a regulation to have the industry going for the freight, while in passenger we are much more, say, public funding, etc. I will just say one word. Freight will be equally treated in a city for public space provisioning and allocation to the infrastructure for freight, etc. If freight could vote. Because freight does not vote. Usually companies, they support politicians, but they don't vote. So we're going to have always a more emphasis to passenger. The only thing that we can do is to prove through really quantified arguments to the mayors that they're going to lose, they're going to face different challenges for public transport to prove the value and for others.
Okay, I give the floor to Simon, then to Karen, and then Sydney.
Yes, this was a very good question, and then was a really good answer also from other panelists. From my perspective, I just wanted to signal one thing, that I'm dealing with the freight, actually, freight transport logistics. But even for this sector, multimodality is very difficult, you know, because normally the stakeholders, they operate in their own communities, in their own silos, and bringing them together, it's really difficult. And this year we have this year of multimodality, and we are trying to address this issue from both angles, actually. So the first part of the year is more focused on the freight and logistics. In terms of multimodality, we had a conference on multimodality in Sofia, but the second part of the year would be devoted to the passenger multimodality and all these aspects related to the passenger transport. So I think we are trying at the EU level to understand this multimodality notion as broadly as possible.
Okay, thanks. Karen?
Yes, as difficult as it is to bring the stakeholders together, I think the city level is the level where they should come together. We've also recognized this within the context of ERTRAC and ALICE, the need for integration, as you mentioned, and interaction between passenger and freight transport. And we've also put this forward as one of the research priorities to work on in the coming years. So this is really a priority. How can you use public transport as well for freight purposes when it comes to more efficiently using these modes? Because efficiency is key in a local context, and also the scarcity of space in cities is key. How can we use the little space that is available in the most efficient way? How can we also capitalize on bus lanes for freight purposes, for example? So this is all very important. And the tool of sustainable urban mobility plans, as well as sustainable urban logistics plans, as the overarching integrated approach, will be key in bringing the two worlds closer together.
Yeah, and Cindy, you wanted to add something?
Yes, just two anecdotes. In Luxembourg, some months ago, we had the tram. Some years ago, when they planned the tram, we proposed them that yes, you can use the tram for freight. It can be a good idea. We can analyze the situation, and we didn't get any feedback. My husband is from Mali, and it's one of the poorest countries in the world. And it's normal to see on the buses fresh goods like chicken. And so at the end, I'm wondering which kind of country is the more advanced for this.
For sharing space, yeah. Well, I have to say, having been on a bus in Paris, I stopped outside the BHV, and somebody got on with a huge sheet of plywood. I was quite surprised at how big a sheet of plywood somebody could get on a bus, actually. But anyway, did you want to add, Alison? Alison, you said...
Yeah, I guess to that point, I think the base challenge of this is what we really need is integrated modeling. And to get to integrated modeling, we need real data. Because like you said, I see it in New York on the subway. The Amazon Prime Now delivery guys are on the subway making their deliveries, but that's not captured in any sort of quantifiable tool we have.
Okay. You want to? No. I'm going to open the floor. Let's have a question from the floor, and then my conscience will be clearer. Okay. So we have a question from the floor, and Graham was first, so could you say who you are?
Graham Ellis from Ellis Transport Services. I'm the city champion for Southampton in the CityLab project. I'm glad to hear that someone is actually saying, let's keep the information from these projects available. I'm sick and tired of going into the EU database and trying to search for projects I know have gone ahead, and they've switched the websites off. You cannot find the information. It's about time we made sure that all of the data these projects generate are actually open source and available to us. Okay. Because it might be 5 years old, but it gives us a baseline to work from.
Okay, I think that's a very good point, and I think one of the encouraging things about this event has been that 4 projects have come together. It's not just at this stage in the projects that you've done this. You have shared information and told each other what's happening throughout the project. That's a credit to the 4 coordinators, among other people, but I think that's an excellent model of what can be done, and that means we get more than 4 projects worth of value out of 4 projects, but your point's well taken. Okay, we have time for another question because you're being very disciplined today. Tamiko.
Thank you. Just a question in terms of measuring...
You have to say who you are.
Oh, I'm Tamiko Burnell, Federal Highway, US. Just a question in terms of, and a comment in terms of measuring benefit. It's one thing to have benefit on a pilot project and see it come to resolution and see the accomplishments, but one of the things I'm also pushing in the US, showing benefit by growth. So one of the big reasons why we're twinning is I consider growth is if you have a CityLab project that you've done over here, and we have Seattle who started a city project from learning about your city project, then that's how I measure growth. So in 5 years, if I have 3 more CityLab, Urban Freight CityLabs, then I would consider that growth. So I think we need to get beyond seeing that growth is completion of a project, and growth is how far can we implement and duplicate that strategy. So I'm just going to challenge everyone as you do projects, it's not about completing that project, it's about how far can that ripple effect go through not just your country, but other countries as well.
Yeah, but we need in place mechanisms like the twinning to encourage that, I think, don't we? But we also have to recognize there's probably some kind of cost burden to doing that. We've got to find a way to fund it, I think.
Yeah, but I think that's a good challenge for all of us to
Exactly.
be creative enough in our own silos to come up with funding. And the other thing I wanted to ask all of you all is, it's great that we're doing urban freight logistics, but what are you doing within your own departments to make sure that's being transferred to the younger generation? Because that's where the success is really going to lie, not so much with us, but the next generation. So if you could say a little bit about how are you transferring the knowledge that you're gaining to the next generation so that they can take the challenges or the non-successes and turn them into successes for the next phase.
Yeah, very good point, Tamika, I think. Yeah, really interesting. Yeah. Eleni, do you want to say anything about this? Yeah. How do we get the next group of researchers and consultants and professional people to be involved in this?
Actually, what we did in our case, during all these 3 years of the project, we used to share the intermediate results of the project by doing some lessons on all levels of undergraduate students, master, and also executive programs. So we disseminate these results in order, except from giving knowledge to people, also to give them the opportunity to understand at which positions they could work after they will have completed their studies. Moreover, we have engaged many students during this process. From time to time, we provide a master thesis. We have also asked them to conduct part of some analysis, mainly for familiarize themselves with the needs of these fields, and also to give them the opportunity to see how they could extend their knowledge to the industry afterwards.
That's a great comment. Maybe I could just actually ask Alison to say something, because I think you are one of the very successful people at getting your students to do things in I guess, cold weather, raining, and they're counting parcels and
Sure.
things like this. And but you always credit them for that, and I really think you're very good about that. But perhaps you could just say something about that.
Sure. So my basic is I send them to stand at the curb and watch what's going on. But yeah, I think this is really critical because I think one of the problems we have is that a lot of the people working in freight just sort of ended up there accidentally without any formal training. So a lot of the same things you mentioned involving graduate students in projects. We've been fortunate with the Metro Freight Center to take advantage of some opportunities through Volvo to also have my students go elsewhere. My PhD student spent a month in Paris at IFSTAR to learn about what was happening there. I've developed a guidebook that's really fundamental on freight just to make it for people who don't know anything about freight to teach it. And last but not least, I sneak a freight module into every single class I teach, no matter what the topic.
Yeah.
So.
Very good, I think, very good. Any other observations on it? Georgia, yeah, of course.
I think each one of the organizations here, academia or not, they try to, let's say, to convey the message, the results of the research to more younger people. Of course, this is the duty of the universities and academia and research organizations like mine. But I think in order to really, and this is going to happen always. I mean, you professor, you will exchange researchers and students, and you will continue to say to the people, to the young people what you need. But what we need here is that, because city logistics is going to be very innovative in the future, and they will require a lot of science together. I think we need competence creation, and this needs structure, probably competence centers in the context of the living labs that exist, or in the context of cities. They need to be there in order to maintain, to create and maintain the competence, and for youngers and for olders too.
So on this question, I'm going to ask Jardar to just make a comment, and then I'm going to just do a little bit like you did. Georgia, you gave everybody a wish, I think, in your thing. You have one wish each in a moment, so you can think what your one wish is for city logistics and the research side. I know you're not all from that field, but you can still have you're still allowed a wish, Simon. So, but we'll just ask Jardar to talk first about this comment, and then we'll just wrap up with that, because the time has gone, believe it or not.
Yeah, okay. Actually, Georgia stole almost my point, but just add that I think that the topic of city logistics, it's never been a sort of sexy topic, but I think still it's obtaining a lot of interest now, even from younger people, because they see the importance of it in cities, and the more you get improvements in the passenger transport, there's a stronger need to deal with the freight transport as well.
I think, to be fair, the topic of cities has gone hugely up the agenda in the last 10 years, and I think you can use all kinds of indicators for this, but the most recent was TRB, where there are 50 papers submitted to the urban freight transportation session this year. That's the biggest number they ever had. We can see the same elsewhere. And of those 50 papers, if you did a profile of the ages of the authors, you'd find that the average age is reducing significantly. Well, people add more and more names, but I mean, okay, it's true that it's reducing. Okay, so we can go maybe this way down the line, and I give you all one wish to do with city logistics, and then we go to the third part of this afternoon's session.
Okay, so I will express my wish as a citizen, not official.
Okay.
Okay, so for me it's quite important that all the actions which are being implemented in the cities for the city logistics involve the local community. It's very important because there is enormous potential behind the local community, and then this shouldn't be neglected.
Good.
Okay, my wish. I will play the role of the researcher in this industry. So I wish to see more of the outcome of these projects and of the work that we are done to be implemented afterwards. I think this is
to really see the impact of what happens.
To see the actual impact to the actual society, passengers, citizens. This would be my wish.
Okay, many different to choose from, but a European-wide sort of that the city authorities see their role they're having in terms of managing urban freight.
Yes, to be more engaged.
A scale of it, not only the front runners.
And I think we should also think about the different sizes and types of cities, because I think that's very important that we find ways to engage with a lot of variety in cities. It's not just, city isn't just a city in that sense.
For me, the wish would be to ensure citizens are empowered to understand the impacts on what they do in regards to city logistics and all that. So really getting the citizens to understand on the impact on their decisions. And this is not on looking into their behaviors or changing behaviors, but it's only making them clear what the meaning of their decisions are.
Sure, and I think that actually that also implies that we, as people who work in this area and claim to have a lot of expertise, we actually need to get a bit better at explaining what it's really about, because I sometimes think it's hidden in sets of information and jargon, which I would find impenetrable, quite honestly.
It's just free. It's free. It's for free for everybody. So then when it's free, and is the only message we convey to the citizen that is for free, it's no emission, it's nothing. It's very difficult to change minds.
Okay, one wish, a part of freight to vote. Okay, the wish
That would be
is
a good wish, though. You're allowed to have one and one more, Georgia, because you've been so good about the time.
Now. I'm giving you the official one. Yeah, correct. So my wish to the ecosystems or the stakeholders of a city is to continue to be there as a group, as a community for city logistics, and to not wait disruptive technology to change the things and improve the situation, but to focus on disruptive thinking and cooperation among them. Complex things like city logistics needs simple approaches. And this way, I hope, and this is my wish to the people, that they will continue that way in order to find solutions.
Very good.
So my wish goes to the construction sector.
Yeah.
Yes.
Focusing is important, Cindy.
Yeah. Because I think that researchers, cities, logistics operators have to be have to pay more attention to this very specific sector. We did an event last month in Luxembourg, trying to bring construction companies and the logistics operators, and we saw that the logistics operators was not really didn't feel really concerned by the topic, but there is a market for this specific sector. So yes, my wish goes for this sector.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to always, we need to keep in mind that, of course, it's many systems in one place, but the needs of the different stakeholders can be different, and we have to think about that when we think about messages and other things. Karen?
My wish would be to see what we are doing on the European level and the cooperation we have here replicated at the local level, and that we can really come to very fruitful local public-private partnerships where the industry and the economic sector is working together with the public sector and the policy goals that they have, and that we can come towards common goals, open attitudes, a sharing attitude also in terms of data and common or mutual trust, and that we can have innovations that serve policy goals, so that we can become aligned across the public and the private sector to have urban freight work in the best possible way, with the interests taken into account of all the different sectors concerned.
Okay, and Alison, it gets harder as it goes along the line here. What did the first one say? No, but
right.
okay,
no,
but seriously.
That was exactly going to be how I start. I'm going to reflect several things that others have said.
But have a wish for this.
Yeah, I wish, again, reflecting a few people before me, that there could be a change in mindset of, right now, it seems that in cities and in transportation planning world, freight is viewed as a problem to be solved, or not as a fundamental good that brings things that are necessary and brings things that are necessary both into and out of cities. And I think just being able to overcome that baseline of freight as a problem would help to bring together more collaborative solutions like the ones that you're already starting in these pilot projects to see come about, but starting from a different place, which is how can we ease the way freight gets into the city as opposed to make it more difficult for it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for being a really great panel. I mean, it's not so easy. It's not so easy to be on a panel as all that. It's not at all easy when there's 8 of you to be on a panel. And you were very, very good to share the words between all of you. So thanks a lot for that and for not getting stressed about it. Okay, well done.